Some storms do not destroy lives. They reveal the kind of hearts that build new ones. That night, heaven didn't pour rain. It poured fate. And in the flooded streets of Port Harcourt, destiny wrapped itself in thunder and found the only soul humble enough to answer. The city had drowned in chaos. Rain hammered every roof, turning gutters into rivers, sweeping away the noise of traffic and pride. People ran for cover, clutching their designer umbrellas and cursing the sky. But through the storm, one figure remained. A thin young woman under a torn wrapper, her firewood crackling weakly beneath a leaking shed. Her name was Aisha Bello, and the scent of her roasted corn was the only warmth left in the night. She was soaked to the bone, her headscarf clinging to her face, yet her eyes stayed fixed on the fire she was trying to protect. For Aisha, storms weren't tragedies. They were teachers. They taught her how to endure, how to keep selling when hunger mocked her, how to keep living when the world had already walked past her like she didn't exist. Then, between thunderclaps, she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to rain. A groan. A man's voice. Weak. Desperate. She turned and saw him, lying half in the mud, half under a streetlight flickering like it too was afraid. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen in Ajagunle. His suit was foreign, his shoes expensive, his wristwatch blinking faintly even in the stormlight. But his face, pale, blood-streaked, motionless, was a portrait of death trying to hold on. People hurried past, some glancing, most pretending not to see. "Leave am," one woman yelled through the rain. "Na drunk rich man. Police wahala go come." Aisha's feet refused to listen. Something deep within her, something older than fear, made her move. She dropped her basket, her roasted corn scattering into the flood, and ran to him. The rain slapped her skin as she knelt beside his body. "Sir?" she said, shaking his shoulder. No answer. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. There. A heartbeat, faint but alive. She looked around. No help. No shelter. Just the endless storm. "Ya Allah," she whispered. "If I leave him, he will die here." With trembling arms, she lifted him, or tried to. He was heavy, his body limp, but desperation gave her strength. Step by step, she dragged him through the narrow lane toward her shack. Water filled her slippers, mud stained her wrapper, but she didn't stop. Every gust of wind felt like the sky testing her will, every rumble of thunder daring her to quit. She didn't. Inside her small home, she laid him on her only mat, the same one she slept on. The walls groaned under the weight of the storm, the candlelight shivering on the zinc walls. She tore a piece of cloth, cleaned the blood from his temple, and whispered prayers between her breaths. "Who are you, rich man?" she murmured. "What are you doing in my gutter?" His chest rose, weak and shallow. She took the blanket she used every night and laid it over him. Her own body shook with cold, but her voice stayed steady. "You'll not die here," she said softly. "Not while I still breathe." Hours passed. The rain softened to a hum. She sat watching him, listening to the storm fade into silence. His face was calm now, the pain still there but softened by sleep. The candle flickered out, leaving only moonlight through the broken roof. Aisha leaned back, exhaustion tugging at her eyes. She had lost her corn, her profit, her night's comfort, but she couldn't feel regret. There was something strange about the man lying there, something that made her heart restless. He looked too lost to be a stranger, too familiar to be coincidence. When her eyelids finally closed, she whispered the last words before sleep carried her away. "If no one helps you, I will." The world fell quiet. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke. Then, a sudden flash of lightning painted the room in white. Aisha stirred, her breath catching as the man's body twitched. For a heartbeat, time froze. He turned slightly, his lips trembling. A whisper escaped them, rough and ghost-like. "Aisha." Her name? Her blood ran cold. She froze, staring at him. He was still unconscious, his eyes closed, his body unmoving. but she had heard it. Her name, from a man she had never seen. The candle was out, but her world had just caught fire. The storm outside quieted, leaving behind only the sound of dripping water, steady, slow, like a heartbeat returning. Aisha sat trembling beside him, unaware that by saving a stranger in the rain, she had just saved her own destiny. Not every stranger comes to test your kindness. Some arrive to rewrite your destiny. That morning, the storm had passed, but the air still held the smell of thunder. The city had returned to its usual rhythm, vendors shouting, cars honking, children splashing through puddles. Yet inside a leaking shack at the edge of Port Harcourt, the world was quietly shifting. The man Aisha saved was breathing again, and with each breath, fate stitched a thread between their lives that neither of them could yet see. When Aisha woke, dawn was already dripping through the holes in her zinc roof, painting streaks of gold across the room. For a second, she thought the storm had taken the stranger away, that maybe he'd vanished back into the mystery from which he came. But then she heard it. A cough, weak, but real. She turned quickly and saw him sitting up, confusion clouding his face, his dark eyes flickering like a candle trying to remember how to burn. He looked around, as if waking in another world. The walls, patched with tin, the smoke-blackened kettle, the lone mat beneath him. Everything spoke of poverty and care. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice was rough and cracked. Where am I?" Aisha moved closer, her steps hesitant but full of purpose. "You're safe," she said softly. "You fainted in the rain. I brought you here." She tried to sound calm, but her heart was beating fast. Something about his presence filled the room with a strange tension. Not fear, not comfort, but something in between. He frowned, pressing a hand to his temple. "I can't remember," he whispered. "Not my name. Not my house. Nothing." His voice carried a broken pride, like a man unfamiliar with helplessness. Aisha studied him closely. His clean nails, the faint accent in his English, the way his eyes darted to details most people ignored. He didn't belong to her world of survival and scarcity. She could see it in the way he breathed. Cautious, deliberate, dignified, even in confusion. Whoever he was, life had once bent its knee to him. She smiled faintly to ease his panic. "Then I'll give you a name," she said. "David. It means beloved." He repeated it slowly, as if testing the weight of it on his tongue. "David," he murmured. "It sounds right. Somehow." In the days that followed, Aisha became his nurse, his shield, his teacher in the art of humility. She gave him food she could barely afford, boiled herbs for his fever, and told him stories of the slum children who laughed even when hungry. He listened with quiet fascination, watching her more than her words, as if trying to learn the secret behind her strength. She noticed things, how he avoided questions about his past, how sometimes his hands trembled when distant sirens echoed, how he would freeze whenever thunder rolled. One night she found him standing outside, staring at the city lights, his expression distant. "Do you ever feel," he asked softly, "like you're living someone else's life?" Aisha had smiled sadly. "Every poor person does. But this one is mine, and I'm not done with it yet." That answer seemed to soothe him. From then on, he helped her at her corn stall, though he burned his fingers often, laughed awkwardly, and tried too hard to learn the rhythm of street survival. Still, the sight of a once elegant man fanning a coal fire in torn clothes made the neighbors gossip. "She's cursed," some said. "Why would a rich man live with her unless he's hiding something?" But Aisha didn't care. She had known mockery long before kindness ever knocked at her door. Their connection deepened in silence, not in words. Some nights when he slept, she'd catch herself studying his face, the shape of his jaw, the faint scar near his neck, the restless movement of his eyes behind closed lids. There was something royal about him, something untamed by hardship. But peace in poverty is like a borrowed light. It never stays long. That night, the rain returned. It came without warning, soft at first, then furious, drumming against the roof. The air turned heavy, pressing down on the small room. Aisha woke to a sound that froze her. A whisper, hoarse and trembling. She turned toward David's mat. His body shook as if caught in a nightmare. "No," he muttered, twisting in his sleep. "They tried to kill me. My own blood." Her breath caught. She knelt beside him, watching his face contort in pain. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his hands clutching the blanket as if holding on to his life. "David," she whispered. "Wake up." But he didn't hear her. He was lost somewhere between dream and memory, fighting ghosts that refused to die. Lightning flashed across the room, turning his face into a portrait of agony. In that instant, Aisha saw something new. A scar on his wrist, shaped like the edge of a gold ring once worn too tightly. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just lost. He was hunted. The thunder outside rolled like a warning drum, shaking the fragile walls. Aisha sat frozen beside him, realizing that the stranger she had saved might be carrying a danger far greater than the rain she pulled him from, and that fate had already chosen her to share in his storm. There are men who carry crowns not on their heads, but in their posture. Men who walk through mud and still make the earth remember their footsteps. When Aisha first met David, he was just a stranger washed up by the rain, lost and wounded. But weeks later, even the slum began to whisper, "That man doesn't walk like one of us." Something about him, his calm, his silence, his eyes that had seen too much, made even chaos stand still when he passed. From the day David could walk again, life in the neighborhood began to change in quiet, unexpected ways. The street boys who once mocked Aisha now greeted her respectfully. The touts who used to harass her stall suddenly stopped showing up. The children who played barefoot in the puddles gathered around her shack each evening to hear David tell stories. Tales of kingdoms, loyalty and courage, stories that sounded too vivid to be imagination. He never raised his voice, yet people listened. He never bragged, yet his words carried weight. Even the old women selling vegetables began calling him Baba Gentle. Aisha would watch from a distance, her heart full of something she didn't dare name. He looked nothing like a poor man. Not in his patience, not in the way he carried himself, not in the quiet authority that followed him like a shadow. He repaired her broken corn stall one morning with precise, steady hands, and when she thanked him, he smiled, a smile both humble and heartbreakingly lonely. "You don't owe me thanks," he said softly. "You gave me back something I didn't know I lost. Purpose." Still, for all his grace, there were moments when the calm broke. When the roar of a motorcycle echoed too close, his eyes darted sharply. When police sirens wailed from a distance, his shoulders stiffened. One afternoon, a firecracker went off down the street, and David dropped the pan from his hands, his entire body trembling. "It's nothing," he muttered quickly, forcing a laugh, but Aisha could see the terror buried deep. Not the fear of noise, but of memory. At night, he sometimes stood outside under the moonlight, staring at the horizon like a man listening for ghosts. Aisha would find him there, lost in silence, his face carved by thoughts he couldn't share. "You remember something, don't you?" she asked gently once. He didn't answer. He only said, "I remember responsibility and loss." Then, after a long pause, he added, "I think I failed someone who trusted me." From that night onward, Aisha stopped asking questions. Love had begun to bloom between them, quiet, tender, and unnamed. It lived in the way she saved the softest corn for him, in the way he shielded her when touts argued nearby, in the long silences they shared under the fading light. They never confessed, but both knew. Destiny had tied them together in the middle of poverty's storm. Days turned into weeks. The neighborhood began to depend on them, Aisha, with her laughter and generosity, and David, with his calm strength and uncanny wisdom. He taught the children how to read, helped the local mechanic fix engines, and became a quiet protector of the street that had once mocked him. People said, "He's a poor man with the dignity of a king." But kings attract attention, even in exile. It was a humid afternoon, the air thick with dust and the smell of roasted corn. Aisha was laughing with a customer when she noticed David standing unusually still, his eyes locked on something across the street. She followed his gaze and saw it, a black SUV crawling slowly down the narrow lane. Its glass was tinted, its tires too clean for the dirt road, and its silence too deliberate. At first, she thought it was just another rich man lost on the wrong side of town. But then she saw David's face, the color draining, the stiffness in his shoulders, the faint tremor in his hands. "David," she whispered. "What is it?" He didn't answer. His gaze followed the car, every muscle in his body tensed like a trapped animal. The SUV stopped near the corner, its engine idling. For a few seconds, the street fell unnaturally quiet. Even the hawkers stopped shouting. The car's tinted window rolled down halfway, and Aisha caught a glimpse of a hand, a ring glinting gold in the sunlight. Then the car moved again, slowly, deliberately, vanishing into the chaos of the market road. David's breath hitched. He turned to Aisha, eyes wide, haunted. "They found me," he whispered, voice low, trembling, as if saying the words made them real. Aisha froze, unable to speak. Around them, the market returned to its noise, unaware that fate had just shifted its weight. David's eyes stayed fixed on the direction the SUV had gone, his chest rising and falling with fear he could no longer hide. In that single moment, Aisha realized that the man she had saved was not just running from his past. His past was coming to claim him. Wentao, the powerful hunt. It is never justice they seek. It is silence. Power does not search for the lost. It searches for what it failed to destroy. The day men in black suits entered the muddy streets of Port Harcourt, holding laminated photographs and whispering promises of reward. The air itself seemed to stiffen. Faces turned away. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the restless wind carried unease because everyone knew. Strangers like these didn't come for good news. Aisha was at her corn stall when she saw them. 2 SUVs parked by the junction, their doors gleaming like mirrors of danger. 4 men stepped out, tall, clean-shaven, wearing the kind of perfume that didn't belong in places like this. One held a tablet, another a printed image. They moved with the precision of hunters, scanning faces, asking questions in low, calculated tones. "We're looking for this man," one said to a shopkeeper, showing the photo. "He's missing. Chief Obadar's son." The shopkeeper squinted. "Never seen him," he lied, eyes flicking nervously toward Aisha's direction. But she had already seen the picture. Just a glimpse, but enough. The face in the photo, polished and perfect, was unmistakable. It was David, except in the image, he wore a designer suit, confidence in his eyes, and a ring gleaming on his finger. Aisha's hands went cold. She didn't wait to think. Abandoning her basket, she ran toward their shack at the end of the street. Inside, David was repairing a broken lantern. He looked up as she burst in, her breath ragged. "David, they're here," she whispered. "Men. They're showing your face. They said they're looking for Chief Obadar's son." For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind that holds 1,000 memories just waiting to strike. David's hands froze mid-air. The color drained from his face. "Obadare," he repeated softly, as though the name had returned from a forgotten grave. "My father." Aisha stared at him, disbelief and confusion mixing in her eyes. "You remember?" His eyes darted toward the window. "Not everything, but enough. My real name, is Tunde Obadare." He swallowed hard, the memories rushing in like a flood. "I wasn't lost. I was supposed to be dead." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then who are these men?" He looked at her with a pain that words could barely hold. "The same ones who tried to kill me. My father's men, but not all of them loyal. I was the heir to his empire, and when I refused to sell my soul to keep it, they came for me. They think I drowned in the river that night, and if they find me now, they'll finish what they started." The noise of engines roared outside, distant but growing nearer. Aisha's mind raced. "You have to leave," she said. "Now." "But where?" She looked towards the horizon, the river glimmering faintly beyond the crowded streets. "The fishing village," she said. "Nobody asks questions there." That night, under the cover of darkness, Aisha smuggled David out of the city. They moved like shadows, through alleys, across bridges, past checkpoints manned by men who could have ended everything with one glance. When a patrol vehicle passed close, she grabbed his hand, whispering, "Don't breathe." His pulse beat against her palm, like thunder trapped under skin. Hours later, they reached the river. The moon hung low, casting a pale light over the water. A fisherman named Baba Sanni, an old friend of Aisha's late father, took them across without a word. The boat rocked gently, the oars slicing through silence. When they reached the other side, dawn was breaking. A new life began. In the fishing village, time moved slower, kinder. David, now Tunda, helped the fishermen mend nets and carried baskets of tilapia to the market. Aisha started smoking fish to sell by the roadside, her laughter slowly returning, lighter this time, though always shadowed by memory. They told the villagers they were husband and wife who had lost their home in the city. No one doubted them. Poverty wears the same face everywhere. They built a small hut near the riverbank, where the wind sang through palm trees and the smell of salt filled their nights. Sometimes, when Aisha watched him from afar, his hand steady, his gaze gentle, she wondered what kind of life he had once lived. Yet even as she admired him, she feared the ghosts that followed him. "You're safe here," she told him once, her fingers brushing his. He smiled faintly. "For now," he said, "but storms don't always stay behind." Weeks turned into months. The men in suits stopped appearing in the city, and Aisha allowed herself to believe they had been forgotten. Together, they built a rhythm. Simple, peaceful, sacred. She would roast fish while he mended nets, and at night they would sit by the river, watching the moonlight dance on the waves. He often told her, "You gave me a new life." She would laugh softly. "No, I only saved you from the rain. You chose to live, but destiny, no matter how far you run, never loses your scent." One quiet evening, while washing his clothes by the river, Aisha noticed something unusual, a shirt pocket heavier than usual. She frowned. Reaching inside, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. She pulled it out slowly, the last rays of sunset glinting against gold. It was a ring, heavy, ornate, and unmistakably old. Her heart skipped. On its surface, engraved in delicate lines, was a crest she had seen before. 2 lions flanking a rising sun, the same symbol she had glimpsed on the men's photograph months ago. The Obadar family crest. The river water slipped through her trembling fingers as she stared at the ring, realization crashing over her like a wave. The man she had loved, the man she had hidden, was not just a fugitive. He was the heir to an empire built on blood and betrayal. Behind her, the wind shifted, carrying faint voices from the forest, footsteps approaching. Some truths crawl back from the grave, not to be remembered, but to demand reckoning. The night David's past returned. The wind howled like a wounded soul, and even the river seemed to hold its breath. Aisha woke to the sound of his voice, not in pain, but in memory. He was calling out a name she had never heard before, a name heavy with power, with loss, with destiny. Adwale Obadar. In that moment, she knew. The man she had saved from the storm was not born for the streets. He was born for a throne. The lamp flickered as David, or Adwale, sat upright, drenched in sweat, his chest heaving. His eyes looked distant, haunted, yet awake for the first time. He pressed his palms to his head as if holding the weight of 2 lives at once. "I remember everything," he whispered, voice trembling between relief and anguish. "The rain, the river, and the night my brother tried to kill me." Aisha's blood ran cold. "Your brother?" she asked, stepping closer. He nodded, every word dragging him deeper into the pain he'd buried. "Tayo," he said bitterly. "My father's other son, my stepbrother. He smiled at me across the dinner table, and that same night, he put a bullet in my chest." The words fell like stones into silence. Aisha stared at him, unable to speak. She had seen the scars on his body, but she had never imagined the story behind them. "Why?" she managed to whisper. Adwale looked up, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the dying lantern. "Because I was next in line," he said quietly. "My father built an empire, Obadar Oil and Gas, and when he died, the company and everything with it became mine. But greed doesn't share blood. Tayo forged documents, bribed the board, and told the world I drowned in the flood that night. The police believed him. The media buried me. My name, my life, became his inheritance." Aisha's hands trembled. She sank onto the floor beside him, her heart breaking under the weight of truth. The man she thought was lost had not just been forgotten. He had been erased. "You've lived here, with me, in this small hut," she said, tears gathering in her eyes, "while your name was being used to build a kingdom of lies." He nodded slowly, his voice low and heavy. "And you're the only person who ever looked at me without wanting something in return." His gaze softened. "You didn't save a stranger that night, Aisha. You saved a man the world was willing to let die." The wind outside grew louder, as if echoing his confession. The lantern flames swayed, throwing long, trembling shadows across their faces. Aisha rose, pacing in silence, her heart torn between fear and faith. "If your brother did this, he'll never stop hunting you," she said. "He'll destroy everything to keep his lie alive." Adwale's eyes hardened, the calm of a man who had seen death and refused to bow to it. "Then let him try," he said. "He already took my name. He won't take my soul." He turned toward her, his tone softer now. "I won't go back for revenge, Aisha. I'll go back for justice, for every man who was betrayed by blood and silenced by power." Aisha's tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. "And if justice kills you?" He smiled faintly, that same gentle, broken smile she had loved from the beginning. "Then at least I'll die as the man my father raised, not the shadow my brother made." For a moment, the night held its breath again. Only the distant croak of frogs and the whisper of the tide filled the air. She wanted to beg him to stay, to let the past rot where it belonged. But she knew that destiny does not negotiate with love. By dawn, Adwale had begun preparing. He gathered the little money they had, wrote notes in a weathered book, and stared often toward the road that led back to Lagos, to everything he had lost. Aisha watched in silence, fear clawing at her ribs. She could see it in his eyes, the weight of purpose, the burden of truth. There was no stopping him now. That evening, as they sat outside the hut, Aisha leaned against his shoulder. "Do you ever wish I hadn't found you that night?" she asked softly. He shook his head slowly. "If you hadn't found me," he whispered, "there would be no one left to remember who I was." The words lingered like a prayer in the wind. Then, a sound shattered the peace. Dogs barking, tires crunching on gravel, heavy footsteps approaching from the forest. Aisha's head snapped up. Adewale's hand instinctively reached for hers, his grip tightening. The air was too still, the silence too precise. She saw it, beams of light cutting through the trees, voices commanding, searching. "Spread out. Don't let him escape again." Adewale's eyes widened. "They found us," he whispered. Before she could respond, the first gunshot ripped through the air, loud, violent, final. The sound of birds scattering into the night followed. Another shot. Then another. The door trembled. The lamp went out. Aisha's breath caught. "David, Adwale, what do we do?" He turned to her, his eyes fierce yet gentle, the calm before a storm. "You run," he said. "Run. And don't look back." She shook her head in panic. "No, not without you." He cupped her face in his hands, his voice trembling. "You gave me life once. Don't lose yours for me now." The door burst open, bullets tearing through wood and smoke. Aisha fell to the floor, covering her ears as chaos swallowed their world. Through the haze, she saw him, Adewale, standing firm, defiant, as the shadows closed in. His last words before the noise drowned everything were barely a whisper. "If I fall tonight, tell them." The air still breathes. Then the gunfire roared, and darkness took the rest. Love becomes unbreakable only when it runs through danger. Some nights test the soul, not with silence, but with storms that tear everything apart, just to reveal what was meant to endure. That night, rain didn't fall. It hunted. Gunfire split the darkness behind them as Aisha and Adewale ran through the soaked forest, their feet splashing through mud and broken roots. Each breath burned like fire. Each step was a war between life and death. The trees bent under the weight of the storm, their branches clawing at the fleeing lovers as though the world itself wanted to keep them from escaping. Adewale clutched Aisha's hand tightly, dragging her through the mangroves toward the sound of waves. "Faster!" he shouted, his voice lost in the thunder. The air was thick with the smell of rain and gunpowder. Behind them, flashlights flickered, small hungry ghosts in pursuit. Aisha stumbled, her foot catching on a root. She fell hard, her palms slicing against sharp stones. Pain shot up her legs, but she didn't cry out. She looked up, rain streaming down her face like tears, and saw him turning back for her. "Leave me," she gasped. "They'll kill you." But Adewale shook his head fiercely. "I've already been killed once," he said. "Not again. Not without you." He lifted her into his arms, her blood mixing with rain, and pressed forward through the marsh until the forest thinned and the river revealed itself, dark, wild, alive with thunder. An old wooden fishing boat lay half-sunken near the shore. Adewale dropped her gently onto the wet sand and rushed to untie it. The rope fought him, swollen from years of neglect, but his hands, once trained for power, now worked like those of a desperate man. Aisha crawled to her knees, watching him with trembling eyes. "If you die," she whispered hoarsely, "my purpose dies too." He turned to her, face streaked with rain, and for a moment all the noise of the storm disappeared. "Then hold on," he said, "because purpose doesn't drown. It sails." With one final pull, the boat came free. He pushed it into the river, helping her climb in before jumping after her. The waves were merciless, tossing the fragile vessel like a leaf in the wind. Rain lashed their faces, wind howled through the mangroves, and lightning ripped across the sky like a warning from the gods. Behind them, gunfire echoed one last time, but the storm swallowed the sound whole. The night stretched on endlessly. Aisha clung to the edge of the boat, her hair plastered to her face, her lips moving in silent prayer. Adewale fought the current, his arms aching, his heart pounding with both fear and defiance. The river roared beneath them, a serpent of black water twisting toward the unknown. At some point, exhaustion overtook them. The world blurred into darkness and rain until even fear fell asleep. When dawn finally broke, it came like mercy, a pale light spilling over the horizon, soft and golden. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt sacred. The river, calm now, carried them slowly forward. Aisha stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. "Are we dead?" she murmured weakly. Adwale's tired smile broke through the shadows. "No," he said softly. "We're where the dead can't find us." She followed his gaze and froze. Rising before them, half hidden behind tall palms and mist, stood a sprawling mansion on the riverbank. Its gates were iron, its walls draped in ivy, its windows shining faintly like eyes that had been waiting. Adwale's breath caught in his throat. "That's my father's house," he whispered. "His secret estate, the one even Tayo never knew existed." And as the boat drifted closer, Aisha felt it too. The haunting sense that this storm had not led them to safety, but to destiny itself. Some homes forget faces, but never their rightful owners. Some walls breathe with memory, waiting for the day truth walks back through their doors. When Adewale stepped onto the cracked stone path leading to his father's river estate, the wind itself seemed to pause, as though the house were holding its breath. The mansion rose from the mist like something sacred, tall, weathered, wrapped in silence. Its paint was faded, its windows clouded by years of dust, but beneath the neglect was the pulse of history. His history. The place hadn't been touched since the night of his death. The air smelled of time and secrets. Adewale stood frozen before the iron gate, his heart pounding. For a long time he said nothing. Aisha watched him quietly, her hand brushing his. "Are you sure this is safe?" she whispered. He nodded slowly. "If the world still believes I'm dead, then this is the one place they'll never look. My father built this house for peace, not power. He used to bring me here when I was a boy. Said the river taught patience better than politics." His voice trembled with memory. When they entered, the sound of the hinges groaning echoed like an old sigh. Dust swirled through the hallway, and the smell of old books and faded perfume filled the air. Portraits of the Obadar lineage lined the walls. Stern men and elegant women, eyes painted with pride. And among them hung a portrait that stopped Aisha cold. Adewale, in his youth, smiling, alive. Before she could speak, footsteps approached. An elderly man appeared from the corridor, bent with age, but steady in his gaze. His voice cracked like a prayer breaking free. "Master Adewale?" Adewale turned sharply, recognition flooding his face. "Baba Kunle," he whispered. The old servant dropped to his knees, trembling. "It's true," he sobbed. "They said you drowned, that the river swallowed you. But I told them the river only takes what it's meant to return." He clutched Adewale's hands, weeping openly. "Your father always said, if you ever came back, the truth would come with you." Within hours, word spread through the household staff. The heir had returned. Old maids cried, guards saluted, and the air buzzed with disbelief. By evening, the news had already slipped beyond the estate walls and into the city. Chief Obadar's lost son is alive. In Lagos, chaos erupted. Headlines screamed, "The heir returns," while social media exploded with speculation. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a lie. But no one was louder than Tayo. In his sleek office overlooking Victoria Island, Tayo hurled a glass against the wall, watching it shatter. "How?" he hissed. "How is he alive?" His aide stood in terrified silence as he paced. "That fool will ruin everything. The contracts, the investors, the control I built." His jaw tightened, eyes burning with hatred. "If the world must doubt him, then I'll give them a reason." That same night, a new story hit the tabloids. Witch from the slums manipulates lost heir. Fortune under spell. They printed Aisha's photo beneath the headline, her face half-shadowed, her name twisted into shame. Anonymous sources claimed she had ensnared Adewale for wealth and fame. At the river estate, Aisha saw the article and went pale. Her hands shook as she read the lies. "They're calling me a witch," she whispered, voice breaking. "They're saying you're cursed because of me." Adewale took the paper from her trembling hands and tore it in half. "Let them talk," he said quietly. "They laughed when my father built this empire from mud. They'll laugh again, until they run out of breath. He turned to Baba Kunle. Call the press, every outlet, every station. I'll tell them who I really am, and who she really is. By noon the next day, the mansion courtyard was packed with cameras, journalists, and flashing lights. The sun glared off the marble balcony as Adwale stepped forward, calm and composed. He wore a simple white shirt, no designer suit, no armor of wealth, just truth. Aisha stood behind him, her face hidden in humility. When the reporters shouted questions, "Where have you been? Who is she? Did she kidnap you?" He raised his hand, silencing them. "You want to know the truth?" he said, voice strong. "Here it is. I was betrayed, shot, and left to die by those who shared my blood. I lost my memory, my name, my world. And when I had nothing, not even my past, this woman," he turned to Aisha, his eyes softening, "gave me everything. She fed me when I was starving, sheltered me when no one cared if I lived. She didn't know my name, only that I was human. When wealth couldn't save me, kindness did." The crowd fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. He stepped closer to the microphones. "So, if the world wants to call her a witch," he said, his tone low but cutting, "then let it know. She cast the only spell that matters. Compassion." The applause that followed wasn't loud at first, just a murmur, a tremor of realization that swelled into thunder. Headlines changed overnight. The witch became the woman who saved the air. For the first time in years, Aisha smiled without fear. That night, the house was alive again. Servants singing softly, candles glowing in every window. Adewale watched from the balcony as she walked among them. The humble girl from the slums, now the heart of a legacy. He turned to Baba Kunle. "The house feels alive again," he said quietly. The old man smiled. "Because its master has come home." Adewale looked out at the river, lost in thought. "No," he murmured, "because its heart finally found peace. But peace, as always, is never the end of the story." Later that night, when Aisha entered her room, she noticed an envelope on her pillow. No name, just her initials written in black ink. She opened it slowly, her heart beating faster. Inside, in delicate handwriting, were 6 chilling words. "You don't know what you've saved." The wind outside moaned, and for the first time in weeks, the mansion's lights flickered. The cost of kindness is often written in betrayal, not because goodness fails, but because the wicked always mistake compassion for weakness. Aisha had learned to survive storms, bullets, and hunger. But she wasn't ready for the kind of cruelty that came dressed in silk and smiled through perfect teeth. It began on a humid afternoon when a black SUV stopped outside the market where she was supervising food donations. The air smelled of roasted plantain and suspicion. Aisha noticed the tinted window roll down, revealing a familiar smirk. Tayo Obadare. His eyes were hidden behind dark glasses, his voice smooth, dripping with the confidence of a man who thought the world still belonged to him. "Miss Aisha Bello," he called out, the corners of his lips curling into something that resembled charm but tasted like venom. "A word, please." Her body stiffened. She wanted to walk away, but the weight of his name froze her steps. She approached cautiously, her heart hammering against her ribs. Tayo gestured to the seat beside him. "Please," he said, "I'm not your enemy. I only wish to talk." She hesitated, then sat, her chin raised. "What could we possibly have to talk about?" He smiled, the kind of smile only the powerful wear when they mistake silence for submission. "My dear," he said smoothly, "you've done quite well for yourself. You've captured the heart of a man worth billions, a man whose name once belonged to me." Her expression remained calm, but her eyes burned. "You mean the name you stole," she said evenly. Tayo chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks. "Strong words, for a woman who came from nothing. Let's not pretend. You're enjoying this life now, aren't you? The mansion, the servants, the luxury. Don't you ever wonder what happens when he realizes you don't belong in that world? Aisha didn't flinch. You sound afraid, she said softly. Afraid that I remind him what real love looks like. His smile faltered, just slightly. I'm not afraid, he said coldly. I'm practical, and practicality says everyone has a price. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a blank check. The paper gleamed under the sunlight, a signature already at the bottom. Write whatever number you want. Leave him quietly. Disappear. Consider it gratitude. For a long moment, she stared at the check. The wind rustled the nearby palm leaves, carrying the faint sound of street vendors calling out prices for roasted yam and oranges. The ordinary world still turning. Then Aisha took the check and slowly tore it into thin, trembling pieces. Each rip cut through the silence like thunder. The fragments fluttered out the car window, scattering across the road like dead butterflies. You can't buy what I gave freely, she said, her voice low but steady. And you'll never understand that, because men like you don't know what love costs. Tayo's jaw tightened, his mask of composure cracking. You'll regret that, he whispered, his tone venomous now. People who defy me always do. She stood, her face calm, but her hands shaking. Then maybe it's time someone teaches you what regret really feels like. And with that, she walked away, leaving him in the shadow of his own fury. For 2 days, the world seemed calm again. Adwal had returned from a business trip, smiling more than usual. He told her plans were in motion to reclaim his father's entire estate, legally and publicly. Once this is over, he said, we'll finally live without looking over our shoulders. That night, she laughed for the first time in months. Real laughter, the kind that reached her eyes. They ate roasted corn by the garden, talking about their old days by the river. The mansion glowed warm and safe under the moonlight. But safety, she would soon learn, was only the pause between storms. 3 nights later, the mansion fell into panic. Aisha never came home. Her phone was found near the market. Her handbag lay in the dirt, torn open. No witnesses, no ransom note, just silence, the cruel kind that whispers she's gone. Adwal tore through the city in fury, his voice echoing through police stations and back alleys. Find her, he roared. Check the cameras. Every car. Every street. Find her! Hours turned into a blur of fear. By midnight, he sat in his office, drenched in sweat, trembling hands clutching her photo. Not again, he whispered. Please, not her. Then the phone rang. A number with no name, no origin. He answered instantly. Aisha. A deep, familiar voice replied, slow and cruel. Not quite, but I have what you're looking for. Adwal's stomach turned cold. Tayo, he breathed. Ah, so you still recognize your brother. Tayo said mockingly. Listen carefully, Adwal. I have something, or rather, someone, who belongs to you. And since you've taken everything that belonged to me, I think it's only fair we trade. A pause. Then, if you want her alive, you'll sign away your inheritance. Every share, every property, every piece of the empire our father left. You have 24 hours. Adwal's voice cracked with rage. You touch her, and I'll... Save your threats, Tayo interrupted coldly. You of all people should know. The price of kindness is never cheap. The line went dead. The phone slipped from Adwal's hand, shattering on the floor. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, echoing like fate's cruel laughter. In that sound, he heard the truth. The war for his soul had just begun. And this time, the cost would not be measured in wealth, but in love. Real love doesn't fear fire, it walks through it. Some flames burn homes, others burn lies, but only one kind of fire reveals the strength of a heart that refuses to abandon what it believes in. After days of terror and sleepless nights, Aisha was found, shaken, bruised, but alive. The police said she'd been left on the outskirts of Ibadan, blindfolded, terrified, her voice hoarse from crying. Adwal drove for hours when the call came, his hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles turned white. When he found her, standing barefoot by the roadside, he didn't speak. He just fell to his knees and held her as if he could crush her pain by sheer will. "You're safe now," he whispered. But even as he said it, he knew safety was only an illusion. Tayo wasn't finished. The Obadar Empire was now split between two names, Adewale's justice and Tayo's vengeance. The world had taken sides, and when war is fought between brothers, it's never just blood that burns. It's everything around them. 3 weeks later, on a humid night, heavy with rain, a raging inferno lit up the sky above Port Harcourt. One of Adewale's major fuel depots was engulfed in flames, the air thick with smoke, explosions echoing through the city. People ran through the streets shouting, "Freedom Depot is burning!" By dawn, the structure was nothing but twisted steel and ash. The next morning, headlines screamed, "Obadar Scandal, Heir's Lover Behind Fire That Destroys Millions." The accusations spread faster than the blaze itself. Grainy security footage, conveniently edited, showed a woman entering the depot grounds before the fire. The face was blurred, but the voice that spoke faintly in the background was unmistakable. "Check the valves. Make sure it looks accidental." It sounded like Aisha. Social media erupted. Talk shows called her a fraud. News anchors labeled her the curse of the Obadar name. Hashtags trended for days. "We're witch of wealth. We're Aisha, the destroyer." By noon, police cars surrounded the mansion. Officers stormed through the gates, cameras following, reporters shouting, "Mrs. Obadar, are you running from justice?" Aisha stood on the marble steps, trembling but defiant. "I didn't do this," she said, her voice steady even as her eyes glistened. "I've never harmed anyone in my life." The lead officer approached with a warrant. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson and property destruction." Adewale appeared at the top of the stairs, his face carved with fury. "You will not touch her," he said coldly. "Sir," the officer replied carefully, "we have orders. Evidence links her to—" "Evidence forged by men who fear her light," Adewale cut in sharply. "But if you insist, she's guilty." He paused, his voice breaking with emotion. "Then arrest me too, because everything she's accused of, every decision she made, was under my name. If she's guilty, I am too." The crowd gasped. Reporters shouted over one another, flashes blinding the air. Aisha turned toward him, tears spilling freely now. "No," she whispered. "You can't—" He reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "You saved me when the world left me to die," he said softly. "Now it's my turn." They were taken together, hand in hand, as the cameras clicked like judgmental eyes. Inside the station, officers whispered as they passed. Some recognized the man who once rebuilt their community. Others averted their gaze in shame. Aisha sat silently, her head resting on his shoulder. "They'll destroy you for this," she murmured. "Let them try," he said. "Truth doesn't need protection. It only needs time." That night, the image of the billionaire heir sitting beside a girl from the slums flooded every screen in Nigeria. The caption read, "Love in Chains, the Obadar Story." But instead of ridicule, something strange happened. People began to believe. In the streets of Lagos, traders whispered, "If she was really guilty, would he stand by her?" Mechanics, taxi drivers, and mothers in marketplaces began to defend her. "That woman saved his life," one said. "Now he's saving her name." The public outrage turned. Within 48 hours, the police were flooded with protests and petitions demanding her release. "Free Aisha Bello" trended nationwide. Meanwhile, in the shadows of his office, Tayo watched the chaos unfold on his television, his jaw tightening. "Fools," he muttered. "He thinks love can win against power?" He turned to his aide. "Make sure the audio stays buried. No one must know where that order came from." But fate has a way of returning what men try to hide. A few days later, inside one of the burnt depot's wrecked offices, a worker sorting through debris found a damaged voice recorder, half melted, but still blinking faintly. He handed it to the police, thinking it useless. But when the audio file was recovered, what played wasn't Aisha's voice. It was Tayo's. "Wes." Recording was short but damning. "Burn it. Make it look like her doing. I want the world to see her as poison." The sound of his laughter echoed in the background. Cold, sharp, unmistakable. The evidence leaked online that night, anonymously, spreading across the nation before dawn. By morning, every radio, every news channel, every social feed was playing the same clip. Tayo Obadare ordering the fire. In the police station, an officer rushed into the interrogation room, breathless. "Sir," he said to Adewale, "you need to see this." He pressed play. The voice filled the room, Tayo's voice. Aisha covered her mouth in shock, tears streaming down her face. Adewale leaned forward, his expression turning to stone. "It's over," he whispered. But the storm in his eyes said otherwise. "No," he said again, quieter this time. "It's only just beginning." When truth finally speaks, even the mighty bow their heads, not to power, but to the justice they thought they could bury. The storm that Tayo Obadare unleashed had finally turned against him, and this time there was no escape, no press release, no lie strong enough to silence the voice of truth that came from ashes and pain. The audio clip spread across Nigeria like wildfire. 6 seconds of damning evidence that burned away every mask Tayo had ever worn. The man once hailed as a business genius was now the face of corruption. The media that once praised him turned rabid, replaying his own words. "Burn it. Make it look like her doing," until the sound itself became his punishment. By morning, the police arrived at his mansion. Cameras crowded the gates, capturing the once untouchable heir in handcuffs. He tried to speak, but every word he uttered sounded hollow. "I was framed," he shouted, his voice cracking. But no one believed him. The mighty Obadar name, once synonymous with wealth and power, now echoed with disgrace. Inside the courtroom, he sat in silence as the charges were read. Arson, attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. When the judge finally asked if he had anything to say, his voice trembled for the first time in his life. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered. "I only wanted what was mine." The judge's reply was sharp, final. What was yours was never taken. It was given to someone who deserved it. The gavel fell, and with it, so did Tayo's empire. Across Lagos, a different sound rose. Applause, cheers, relief. For the first time, the people saw justice, raw and real, triumph over privilege. The Obadar name no longer belonged to corruption. It belonged to redemption. At Freedom headquarters, journalists gathered for the press conference that would redefine the family's legacy. Adewale, or David, as Aisha still called him, stood at the podium in a dark gray suit, the company's emblem gleaming behind him. His voice was steady, but emotion trembled beneath every word. "When my father built this empire," he began, "he said it should serve people, not control them. Somewhere along the line, that promise was lost. But one woman reminded me what it means to build with compassion, not greed." He turned, and Aisha stepped forward, dressed in white, radiant but humble, her eyes reflecting both strength and disbelief. The crowd gasped softly as he took her hand and led her to the center of the stage. "She is the reason I'm alive," he continued. "When I had no name, she gave me kindness. When I had no hope, she gave me faith. Today, I want the world to remember that this empire stands because of her heart, not my inheritance." The hall erupted in applause, but he wasn't done. He looked toward the audience, the cameras, the millions watching from screens across the nation. "From this day forward," he declared, "half of Obadar Holdings belongs to Aisha Bello, the woman who proved that greatness doesn't come from power, but from love." The room went still, then exploded into cheers. Journalists stood, clapping. Workers from across the company cried openly. Even the old board members who had once doubted her bowed their heads in respect. Aisha's lips trembled as she looked at him, her voice breaking. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I never helped you for a reward." He smiled, the same quiet smile he'd worn the first day she pulled him from the rain. "I know," he said softly. "That's why you deserve it." Then, before anyone could react, David turned toward her, slowly lowering himself to one knee. The hall fell silent. Time itself seemed to stop. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box, simple, elegant, yet carrying the weight of everything they'd survived. His voice was low but clear, echoing through the hall and beyond every television screen. "Aisha Bello," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "You gave me life when I had nothing left to live for. You taught me that love doesn't need gold to shine. Today, before the world that once laughed at us, I ask you, will you walk beside me for the rest of my days?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as the crowd held its breath. In that moment, every hardship, every insult, every scar from their journey became sacred. Proof that love built on faith could conquer even the cruelest destiny. She nodded through her tears, whispering, "Yes, always." The hall erupted, flashes, applause, shouts of joy filling the air like thunder. David slipped the ring on her finger, then stood, pulling her into an embrace that silenced even the cameras. For the first time in years, the world wasn't watching a scandal. It was witnessing grace. As confetti fell and the cheers thundered, the lights dimmed for a moment. A low hum came from the crowd, a technician rushing to check the monitors. On one of the screens, a shadow flickered. A man in a dark prison cell, his face bruised but smiling. It was Tayo, watching the live broadcast on a small TV. He leaned back and whispered into the darkness, "Enjoy your happy ending, brother. Every kingdom falls, even the ones built on love." The screen went black. The same streets that once laughed now sang her name. Once, those voices had mocked her torn dress and calloused hands. But on this day, those same streets bloomed with flowers, music, and tears. Destiny had returned to the place where her kindness began, not to remind her of what she suffered, but to show the world how beauty can grow from broken soil. The sun rose softly over the slums of Port Harcourt, gilding the tin rooftops in gold. The narrow alleys where Aisha once sold roasted corn were now lined with colorful fabrics, children holding roses, and banners painted with one phrase, "Love built this." Even the rain that had once drenched her in poverty seemed to hold its breath. Everywhere she turned, the people who had once pitied her now looked on with awe. The governor's convoy parked beside the same roadside stall she once called home. CEOs, ministers, and wealthy families from Lagos walked carefully through puddles to reach the small open space behind her old shack, the very spot where she had once knelt beside a dying stranger in the rain. That stranger now waited for her, beneath a wooden arch wrapped in white lilies, no longer the man she had rescued, but the man who had risen because she believed in him when no one else did. Adewale, the once forgotten heir, stood tall in a cream agbada embroidered with subtle gold, his eyes never leaving her. His heart beat not with pride, but with gratitude. When the music began, Aisha stepped forward, barefoot, her white gown brushing the dusty ground. The hem caught bits of earth, but she didn't care. "Let it remember me," she'd said earlier when the stylist offered her shoes. This ground carried me when the world wouldn't. Her veil was simple, her jewelry modest, but her smile, radiant, steady, unshakable, silenced every diamond in the crowd. As she walked, women who once whispered behind her now wept openly. The air was thick with reverence. Even the governor bowed his head slightly as she passed. Old men in the front row murmured, "This one." She was chosen by God himself. When she reached the altar, Aduel took her hands, the same hands that had once fed him corn and washed his wounds. "You saved me from death," he said softly, voice trembling. "Today I promise to spend my life proving you were never wrong to love me." Tears glimmered on her cheeks as she replied, "And I promise that wealth will never change the heart that once begged heaven for one more chance to feed a stranger." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound of celebration mingling with the distant echoes of life from the streets. Laughter, music, the rhythm of drums beating hope back into memory. But as the ceremony ended, a quiet hush fell over the crowd. An old man, barefoot, gray-bearded, dressed in rags, slowly made his way to the aisle. The guards moved to stop him, but Aisha raised her hand. "Let him come," she said gently. He approached, his face familiar but blurred by time. His eyes, weary yet bright, met hers with recognition. "You once gave me your last meal," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You told me heaven never forgets kindness." Aisha gasped, memories flashing. The starving beggar she had fed years ago, the night before she met Adewale. She reached out, taking his hand in both of hers. He smiled faintly, his gaze distant, almost knowing. "Heaven keeps receipts for kindness," he murmured. "Today, you just collected yours." Before she could speak, the man stepped back into the crowd, and when she turned again, he was gone. But where he had stood, the ground shimmered faintly, as if kissed by unseen rain. Aisha clutched her chest, her eyes lifted to the sky. Somewhere deep inside her heart, she felt it. A whisper carried by the wind. Kindness always comes home. Some people collect wealth, others become it. Time, power, and history would all learn her name, but not because she owned the world, because she changed it with grace. Aisha Bello Obadare, once the barefoot girl who sold roasted corn in the rain, had become the richest woman in Africa. Not through greed or ambition, but through the same unshakable kindness that once saved a stranger's life. Her empire no longer glittered in glass towers or golden gates. It lived in the smiles of the people she had lifted. The Obadar Foundation, now one of the continent's largest, reached from Lagos to Nairobi, from Accra to Johannesburg. She built hospitals for the forgotten, schools in villages where chalk was once a luxury, and safe shelters for widows who had nowhere to go. She never gave for applause. She gave because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible. Each morning, she walked through the halls of her mansion, vast, elegant, yet simple, pausing at one wall that held her most prized possession, a small framed torn blanket. Its edges were frayed, its colors long faded. Beneath it, a golden plaque read, "The night kindness changed destiny." Visitors often asked why she, a woman of such means, kept it. Aisha would only smile and say, "Because this is where my wealth began." Reporters often asked her about her success. "How did you do it?" they'd say. "How did a girl from the slums become the queen of an empire?" She would smile softly and answer, "Because I never forgot how it feels to have nothing. The moment you forget that, you start losing what matters." Her life became a living parable. When others built empires for profit, she built hope from memory. She funded scholarships for orphans, created programs for street children, and taught women to build businesses from what they had, not what they lacked. The same markets that once pitied her now celebrated her with murals and songs. Vendors would point to her passing convoy and tell their children, That woman? She's proof that God remembers the good you do. Yet, despite all the splendor, Aisha's heart remained untouched by pride. Some nights, she would step out onto her balcony when it rained, closing her eyes to the sound of thunder, remembering that one night, the rain, the stranger, the choice that changed everything. She often whispered a prayer into the wind. May my kindness never end with me. Years passed, and legends grew around her. But one rainy evening, one eerily like the night her story began, destiny came knocking again. The thunder rumbled softly, rain gliding down the mansion's golden gates. A security guard approached her nervously. "Madam," he said, "there's a child outside. Says she won't leave." Aisha rose from her chair, curiosity warming her tired eyes. She stepped outside, umbrella in hand, and there, standing barefoot in the downpour, was a little girl, no older than 8, holding a shivering puppy wrapped in rags. Her dress was torn, her hair drenched, but her gaze was brave. "Please," the girl said softly. "It was cold. I didn't know where else to go." Aisha knelt before her, heart pounding with the echo of her own past. For a moment, she saw herself, the same hunger, the same innocence, the same courage to be kind, even in need. She reached out, brushing the rain from the girl's cheek, and smiled the same gentle smile she once gave a dying man in the storm. She rose, taking the child's small hand in hers. "Come in, child," she said warmly, leading her through the golden gates. Kindness begins again. As they stepped inside, the rain softened, and for a fleeting moment, lightning flashed across the sky, not with fury, but with blessing, as if heaven itself was smiling at the circle now complete. If this story moved something deep inside you, don't scroll away just yet. The next story might speak to your soul, even louder. Tell us what part stayed with you the most in the comments, and like to share and subscribe it with someone who still believes kindness has power. Every like, every word, every view keeps stories like this alive. Stay till the end. Destiny always hides in the next tale.